Imagine this, a small village suffocating under the grip of a relentless drought, fields cracked, families struggling to survive, and the future dimming with every passing day. In the heart of this despair stands a boy, armed with nothing but curiosity and a determination to make a difference. What he does next defies every expectation, proving that innovation isn't born from privilege. It's sparked by necessity. This is the story of William Kamkwamba, a boy from Malawi who transformed his community with nothing more than a dream and scraps from a junkyard. His windmills brought light to the darkest nights, water to barren fields, and hope to a village that had nearly lost its way. But his journey wasn't easy. It was met with skepticism, setbacks, and the harsh realities of survival. What drove this young inventor to persist when everyone else doubted him? How did he turn a simple library book into a life-saving innovation? And what lessons can we learn from his unwavering belief in the power of an idea? By the end of this story, you'll understand that true ingenuity doesn't require wealth or advanced tools. It begins with a question: what can I do to make things better? William found his answer, and in doing so, he inspired the world. The sun rose over the quiet village of WINDMILL, casting its golden light on a landscape marked by simplicity and struggle. The villagers, bound by their reliance on agriculture, began their days early, tending to fields that stretched endlessly under the Malawian sky. William Kamkwamba, a boy with a boundless imagination, lived amidst this routine. His parents, Trywell and Agnes, worked tirelessly, cultivating the earth with a determination fueled by hope. Yet, as the rains began to falter, the land reflected their growing despair, dry and unyielding, as if resisting their touch. This was a place where dreams often collided with the harshness of reality. As days turned into weeks, the absence of rain transformed from a mild concern to a looming catastrophe. The once vibrant fields were now cracked and barren, each fissure a cruel reminder of nature's unpredictability. William watched his father return home each evening, his shoulders hunched under the weight of their failing crops. Agnes worked to stretch what little they had, her hands skillfully turning scraps into meals that barely satisfied. For William, the village's struggle was more than physical. It was the sinking realization that survival itself was becoming uncertain. The Kamkwamba family was not alone in their suffering. Across the village, whispers of desperation grew louder, carried on the wind like a somber melody. People bartered their belongings for food, their faces etched with a mix of fear and resilience. Children played in dusty streets, unaware of the shadows creeping into their parents' lives. William, however, felt the weight of it all. He observed the quiet sacrifices his parents made, and began to feel a burning question form within him. How could he help? Was there a way to change their fate? One night, sitting under the vast starlit sky, William found himself lost in thought. The air was still, the silence broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. His parents were inside, whispering about their dwindling resources. The night seemed to mirror their uncertainty, vast and unknowable. But William felt something stir, a flicker of determination. Somewhere in the stillness, an idea began to take shape, though it was still too faint to grasp. As the drought tightened its grip on WINDMILL, the village's rhythm began to falter. Markets that once bustled with life grew quieter, their stalls offering little more than wilted vegetables and despairing glances. The laughter of children, a sound that had once filled the air, was replaced by the murmurs of adults trying to strategize against the inevitable. William listened closely to these conversations, piecing together fragments of hope and fear. His father, Trywell, often spoke of resilience, but even his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. The drought was not just stealing their crops, it was draining their spirits. Every morning, William would accompany his father to the fields, though there was little left to tend. The soil, once rich and fertile, now crumbled like ash beneath their feet. Trywell would dig into the earth, searching for moisture that no longer existed, his hands caked in dust. William mimicked his movements, not because he believed they'd find water, but because he felt the need to support his father in whatever way he could. Each empty well and each failed attempt deepened the weight on his young shoulders. Yet within him, a quiet resolve was building. At home, Agnes tried to mask her worry, but her actions spoke louder than her words. She began to cut back on her own portions of food, ensuring that William and his sisters ate enough to endure the day. Her hands moved with precision as she worked, but her eyes betrayed her inner turmoil. William noticed how she would pause, staring out the window, lost in thought. It was in these small moments that he understood the gravity of their situation. His family wasn't just surviving the drought, they were fighting to hold on to hope. One evening, as the village prepared for another restless night, a faint question echoed in William's mind. Why did the rains betray them? His thoughts lingered on the idea that perhaps nature wasn't the enemy, but rather something to be understood and harnessed. Sitting under the glow of the moon, He imagined possibilities far beyond his current knowledge. It wasn't clear how or when, but deep down, he felt the stirring of a solution. In the days that followed, the drought's impact became impossible to ignore. The village's well, once a source of life, now offered nothing but dry echoes as buckets hit the bottom. Women gathered around it, their voices filled with worry as they shared stories of the past, times when the rains came as promised. William sat nearby, listening intently. Each story, though steeped in nostalgia, only deepened his resolve to find a way out of their current suffering. He began to notice patterns in nature, small hints of how the world worked, and tucked these observations away in his mind. The nights grew colder, both in temperature and in the weight they carried. Inside their small home, the Kamkwamba family would huddle together, sharing what warmth they could. Trywell often told stories of his youth, trying to distract the children from their hunger. But William's mind rarely rested. He would stare at the flickering flame of their kerosene lamp, mesmerized by its steady glow. The idea that light and energy could transform their lives began to take hold. Though he didn't yet have the answers, he felt certain that there was a connection waiting to be uncovered. Around the village, some families began to leave, hoping for better fortunes elsewhere. William watched as neighbors packed their belongings, their faces etched with sadness and resignation. He wondered if his family might face the same choice. Trywell, however, was determined to stay, no matter the hardship. "This is our home," he told William one evening, his voice firm yet tender. That declaration anchored William's thoughts, giving him a reason to fight harder for the life they had built together. If leaving wasn't an option, finding a solution became his only mission. On the final day of the dry season, as the villagers gathered to pray for rain, William stood at the edge of the crowd, his mind elsewhere. While others looked to the sky, he looked at the ground, at the tools and scraps scattered across the village. A question began to form. Not a prayer, but a possibility. What if they didn't have to wait for rain? What if they could create their own source of power? Something that didn't rely on the whims of the clouds. It was a thought that seemed impossible, but it refused to leave him. William's fascination with how things worked had always set him apart from others in WINDMILL. While most children spent their free time playing games, he was busy dismantling broken radios and discarded gadgets. His small hands carefully pried apart circuits and wires, his mind buzzing with curiosity. Jeffrey, his cousin, often joined him, though more out of amusement than understanding. "What are you trying to make now?" Jeffrey would ask, his tone a mix of teasing and genuine intrigue. For William, these experiments weren't just play. They were glimpses into a world of endless possibilities. Gilbert, the son of the village chief and another close friend, brought a sense of balance to their trio. He admired William's creativity and often provided materials he'd scrounged from the chief's storeroom. Together, the three boys would huddle in William's small yard, their voices filled with excitement as they pieced together scraps of metal and wire. On one occasion, William managed to build a small car out of bottle caps and plastic, powered by a rubber band. It was a simple creation, but to him it was proof that his ideas could come to life. Though their resources were limited, William's imagination knew no bounds. He began to dream of projects far bigger than toy cars. At night, he would lie awake, staring at the roof of his family's hut, imagining machines that could plow fields, pump water, and even light up their dark village. "One day," he whispered to himself, "I'll make something that matters." These dreams weren't just about invention. They were about transforming the lives of those he loved. It was a goal that felt both daunting and exhilarating. Yet not everyone saw the potential in his tinkering. Trywell, his father, often dismissed his efforts as distractions from more important duties. "You should be helping in the fields," he'd say, his voice heavy with frustration. But William's mother, Agnes, was quietly supportive. She'd watch from a distance as her son worked, her heart swelling with pride. Though she didn't fully understand his creations, she recognized the spark of determination in his eyes. And so, despite the skepticism around him, William continued to experiment, driven by the belief that he could one day make a difference. William's thirst for knowledge grew stronger with each passing day. Though his family couldn't afford new toys or tools, he saw opportunity in the scraps and debris scattered around the village. Broken radios, discarded wires, and old batteries became treasures in his hands. "One man's trash is another man's invention," he'd joke with Jeffrey and Gilbert, his smile infectious. To William, these items were more than junk. They were pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved, a gateway to understanding the mechanics of the world around him. His passion for science began to catch the attention of his teachers at school. One of them, Mr. Kachigunda, noticed William's knack for asking questions that went beyond the textbook. "Why does a battery store energy? How do engines make things move?" William's inquiries were endless, and his teacher encouraged him to explore them further. It was in these moments that William felt a spark of validation. Someone believed in his potential, and that belief pushed him to dream even bigger. But the reality of village life was never far from his mind. Every time he returned home, he was reminded of the struggles his family faced. The drought, the failing crops, and the hunger looming over them were constant shadows. While other children seemed to accept these hardships as part of life, William saw them as challenges to overcome. He began to think of his inventions not just as personal projects, but as tools that could one day alleviate their suffering. His vision was no longer about curiosity. It was about survival. Even as his ambitions grew, William remained grounded in the support of his friends. Geoffrey and Gilbert became his most trusted allies, helping him gather materials and brainstorm ideas. "What if we could make a machine to fix the rain?" Geoffrey joked one afternoon, laughing at the absurdity. But to William, the idea wasn't so far-fetched. Machines could solve problems. He just needed to figure out how. Together, the three boys dreamed of creations far beyond the limitations of their circumstances, fueling William's belief that change was possible. As William's experiments became more ambitious, his small yard turned into a makeshift workshop. Old bicycle parts, broken flashlights, and rusty nails piled up around him as he worked tirelessly, trying to piece together his ideas. His friends often teased him about his messy laboratory, but they never doubted his determination. To William, every failure was a lesson, every broken component a chance to start fresh. He didn't just see what things were, he saw what they could become, and that vision kept him moving forward, even when others didn't understand. Despite his progress, there were moments of frustration that tested his patience. Some inventions didn't work as planned, and there were days when his hands ached from tinkering with stubborn parts. Yet each time he felt the urge to give up, he remembered the struggles of his family and the despair etched into his father's face. Those images reignited his resolve, reminding him why he was doing this. His experiments weren't just for fun. They were acts of defiance against the challenges that threatened to consume his family and his community. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Gilbert arrived with a surprise, an old book that had been collecting dust in his father's house. The pages were filled with diagrams and instructions on simple machines. William's eyes lit up as he flipped through it, absorbing the knowledge like a sponge. "This is exactly what I needed," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. With Geoffrey and Gilbert by his side, he began sketching ideas, using the book as a guide. This was a turning point, a moment when his dreams started to feel within reach. The three boys spent hours in that small yard, their laughter and chatter filling the air as they brainstormed new ideas. For William, these moments weren't just about invention, they were about hope. He was learning to see the world not as it was, but as it could be. And though he didn't yet know how, he believed with every fiber of his being that one of these ideas would change everything. The seed of invention had taken root, and it was only a matter of time before it began to bloom. The dry season stretched on longer than anyone in WINDMILL had anticipated, and the effects of the drought grew unbearable. Families were forced to ration their food, often going to bed hungry. The once bustling fields now stood barren, their cracked soil a cruel testament to nature's wrath. For William's family, the situation was dire. His father, Trywell, worked tirelessly to salvage what he could from their dying crops, but the harvests were too meager to sustain them. Hunger became an unwelcome guest in their home, one that refused to leave. The financial strain brought new challenges, and difficult decisions had to be made. William, who had always excelled in school, was forced to drop out because his family could no longer afford the fees. For William, this was a crushing blow. Education had been his lifeline, a source of hope and knowledge that fueled his dreams. Now, stripped of his formal learning, he felt lost. Watching his friends continue their studies while he stayed behind was a bitter reminder of what the drought had stolen from him. Despite this setback, William's thirst for knowledge didn't wane. Determined to learn on his own, he began visiting the village library, a small building filled with books donated from across the world. The library became his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the harsh realities of his life. There, he pored over every book he could find, searching for answers to questions that consumed his mind. Though his access to resources was limited, his hunger for learning was limitless. He believed that somewhere within those pages lay the key to changing his family's fate. At home, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Trywell and Agnes tried to shield their children from the worst of it, but the cracks in their resilience were beginning to show. Arguments over how to stretch their resources became more frequent, and the weight of responsibility fell heavily on Trywell's shoulders. William watched his father silently endure the strain, his once strong figure now marked by weariness. It was in these moments that William's determination deepened. He couldn't bear to see his family suffer like this, and he vowed to find a way to bring relief to their lives. As the days passed, the hunger in WINDMILL became a constant, gnawing presence. Families began selling their belongings, furniture, tools, even heirlooms, in desperate attempts to buy food. William watched as neighbors dismantled their homes piece by piece, trading doors and windows for sacks of maize. The village, once a close-knit community, now felt fractured, each family fighting its own battle for survival. For William, these sights were both heartbreaking and motivating. He couldn't shake the thought that there had to be another way, a solution no one had considered yet. One afternoon, William followed his father to the local market, hoping to find affordable grain. The scene was chaotic, filled with the voices of desperate buyers and indifferent sellers. Prices had skyrocketed, and many returned home empty-handed. Trywell managed to secure a small bag of maize, but the cost had been steep, another sacrifice for a meal that would barely last a few days. On the walk back, William carried the bag on his shoulder, its weight a physical reminder of the burden his family bore. His mind raced with ideas, but none felt tangible yet. At the library, William began to focus his energy on books that seemed practical: agriculture, mechanics, energy, anything that might hold an answer to the crisis they faced. One book in particular caught his eye, a science textbook filled with diagrams and explanations of how machines worked. Though the language was unfamiliar, the pictures spoke volumes. William traced his finger along the drawings of circuits and motors, imagining how such concepts could be applied to his own village. The seed of an idea was forming, though he didn't yet have the tools to nurture it. Back at home, the strain on the family grew heavier. Agnes had begun skipping meals entirely, pretending she wasn't hungry so her children could eat. Trywell spent long hours in the fields, searching for any signs of life in the soil. William saw these sacrifices and felt an ache in his chest, a mixture of gratitude and guilt. He knew his family was doing everything they could to survive, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. His visits to the library became more frequent, his determination stronger with each passing day. One evening, as the family gathered around their dimly lit kerosene lamp, the weight of the day's struggles hung heavy in the air. Trywell's face was etched with exhaustion, his voice quiet as he spoke about the challenges ahead. Agnes sat beside him, her hands resting on her lap, but her eyes were distant, lost in thought. William sat in silence, listening but also imagining. The flickering flame of the lamp cast shadows on the walls, and for a moment, William wondered if light itself could somehow bring hope back into their lives. The days at the library began to pay off as William stumbled upon a concept that sparked his imagination: energy. The idea that power could be harnessed from natural sources seemed revolutionary to him, especially in a village where electricity was unheard of. He read about wind, about how its force could be converted into energy to drive machines. The words and diagrams filled his mind with questions and possibilities. Was it truly possible to create something that could change their reality? His curiosity soon turned into an obsession. Despite the hunger and exhaustion that plagued him, William began to sketch ideas in the dirt outside his home. Jeffrey and Gilbert, ever supportive, watched as he drew lines and symbols they didn't understand. "What are you up to now?" Jeffrey asked, shaking his head with a mix of amusement and admiration. William looked up, his eyes alight with determination. "I think I've found a way to help," he said, his voice steady but filled with hope. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was moving closer to a solution. The struggle continued, but so did William's resolve. With each passing day, he became more certain that the answers he sought were within his reach. Though his resources were limited, his spirit was not. In the midst of the drought and despair, William had discovered something invaluable: a purpose. He didn't yet know how far his ideas would take him, but he was ready to try. And as the dry season dragged on, the boy who had been forced to leave school began to teach himself a lesson that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The library had become William's second home, a place where the weight of the drought seemed to momentarily lift. The dusty shelves filled with donated books held treasures he had only begun to uncover. One afternoon, as he flipped through the pages of an old science textbook, something caught his eye: a diagram of a windmill. The image showed how wind could generate electricity, and for a moment, William's world expanded. He could almost hear the sound of spinning blades, feel the breeze of something new, a solution that could transform his family's life. The book, titled Using Energy, became William's most prized possession. Though much of the text was written in English, a language he didn't fully understand, the diagrams were clear and precise. He studied every detail, tracing the shapes of turbines and circuits with his finger, his mind racing with possibilities. He began to see the wind not as an invisible force, but as a resource waiting to be harnessed. "This is it," he thought, clutching the book tightly. It wasn't just a source of knowledge, it was a key to survival. When he returned home that evening, William's excitement was impossible to hide. He explained his discovery to his family, his words tumbling out in bursts of enthusiasm. Trywell listened patiently, though his expression remained skeptical. "How can wind bring food to our table?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. William didn't have all the answers yet, but he believed in the potential of his idea. "If we can make electricity," he said, "we can pump water and grow crops again." It was a bold claim, and not everyone was convinced. But William refused to give up. In the following days, William began to share his idea with others in the village. The reactions were mixed. Some were curious, while others laughed at the notion of a boy building a windmill. "It's impossible," one man said, shaking his head. But William didn't let the doubt deter him. Instead, it fueled his determination. He returned to the library every chance he got, immersing himself in the pages of Using Energy and sketching plans for his windmill. To him, every scoff and laugh was just another reason to prove them wrong. William's curiosity quickly turned into action. He began gathering materials, combing through the scrap heaps scattered across WINDMILL. Old bicycle parts, rusty bolts, and discarded pieces of metal became his treasure. With each item he collected, the vision of his windmill grew clearer in his mind. Geoffrey and Gilbert, ever loyal, joined in the search, though they often joked about the seemingly impossible task. "You're really going to make the wind work for you?" Gilbert teased. William smiled, brushing off the skepticism. He could see what they couldn't yet: a future shaped by his determination. As his collection of materials grew, so did the challenges. Many of the parts he needed were broken or incomplete, and finding replacements was no small feat. William spent hours examining each piece, figuring out how it could fit into his design. His sketches became more detailed, filled with calculations and measurements he'd learned from the library book. The process was slow, and progress came in small victories: a bolt that fit perfectly, a gear that turned smoothly. Each step forward felt like a triumph, a reminder that he was moving closer to his goal. Word of William's windmill project began to spread across the village. Some people were intrigued, while others dismissed it as the foolishness of a boy with too much time on his hands. "Why waste your energy on this when there's real work to be done?" one man asked, shaking his head. But William was undeterred. He wasn't building the windmill for approval. He was building it for his family, for the chance to change their lives. Every skeptical comment only strengthened his resolve to see the project through. At home, his family watched his efforts with a mix of hope and doubt. Trywell, ever practical, struggled to see how this windmill could make a difference. "The rains won't come just because you build a machine," he said one evening, his tone weary. But Agnes, watching her son work late into the night, believed in his determination. She didn't fully understand his plans, but she knew the strength of his heart. "Let him try," she told Trywell softly. "Sometimes, hope is all we have." And with that quiet support, William pressed on. In the quiet hours of the evening, William sat under the glow of a kerosene lamp, his hands moving methodically as he pieced together his windmill. The book lay open beside him, its pages worn from constant use. He traced the diagrams with his fingers, translating the abstract ideas into the reality of wires, gears, and blades. Each connection he made brought him closer to his vision, and though the progress was painstakingly slow, it filled him with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. Outside, the wind whispered through the village, carrying with it a quiet promise. William began to see the invisible force as an ally, something he could tame and use to bring light to the darkness. The concept was as thrilling as it was daunting. Each gust of wind reminded him of the potential waiting to be unleashed. He imagined what it would feel like to see the windmill turn for the first time, its blades catching the breeze, producing the electricity his family desperately needed. That vision became the fuel that kept him going. Despite his focus, doubts occasionally crept into his mind. What if it didn't work? What if everyone was right, and he was just a foolish boy chasing an impossible dream? But each time those thoughts surfaced, William pushed them aside, focusing instead on the faces of his family. He thought of his father's weary determination, his mother's quiet sacrifices, and the laughter of his sisters, which had grown rare in recent months. They were his reason to keep going, the reason he couldn't afford to fail. The villagers continued to watch William's progress with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Children gathered near his workshop, whispering about the strange contraption taking shape. Some adults shook their heads, dismissing it as a waste of time. But for William, their opinions didn't matter. He wasn't building the windmill for recognition. He was building it for survival. And as the final pieces of his design began to come together, he felt a surge of determination. The windmill wasn't just an idea anymore. It was becoming real, and it carried with it the hope of a better future. With the windmill design clear in his mind, William knew he needed specific materials to bring his vision to life. The challenge, however, was daunting. WINDMILL was a village of scarcity, where resources were limited and access to tools or machinery was nearly impossible. But William was undeterred. If he couldn't buy what he needed, he would find it elsewhere. And so, he began his daily trips to the local scrapyard, a sprawling collection of discarded items that most considered useless. To William, it was a treasure trove of possibilities. Geoffrey and Gilbert joined him on these scavenger hunts, their playful banter easing the intensity of the task. The boys rummaged through piles of rusted metal and broken appliances, searching for anything that could fit into William's plan. "What about this?" Jeffrey called, holding up an old bicycle frame. William inspected it carefully, his mind already visualizing how it could be repurposed. "This will work," he said, his tone decisive. Each find, no matter how small, brought him closer to transforming his idea into reality. The scrapyard became a second home for William, a place where imagination and ingenuity could thrive. He learned to see potential in even the most unlikely objects: bent nails, cracked gears, frayed wires. Every piece had a purpose, even if it wasn't immediately obvious. With each visit, his collection grew, and so did his confidence. He began to feel like a detective piecing together a mystery, each part a clue leading him closer to his solution. The windmill was no longer just a dream, it was becoming something tangible. Back in the village, news of William's scavenging efforts spread quickly. Some villagers watched in amusement as he dragged his findings home, shaking their heads at what they saw as a pointless endeavor. "What could a boy possibly build with all that junk?" they whispered. But William paid no attention to their doubts. He wasn't building for approval, he was building for hope. Every rusted part and broken appliance he gathered was another step toward proving them wrong, and in his heart, he knew that even the smallest progress was worth fighting for. The pile of collected materials outside William's home grew larger with each passing day, drawing curious glances from neighbors and passers-by. Children often stopped to poke at the heap of twisted metal and broken bicycle parts, giggling as they guessed what the strange boy was building. "A flying machine!" one shouted. "No, it's a monster trap!" Another laughed. William smiled at their guesses but said nothing. He preferred to let his work speak for itself when the time came. For now, the windmill remained his secret, a dream taking shape, piece by piece. One of William's most important discoveries was an old dynamo, a small generator that had once powered a bicycle light. Though it was worn and partially damaged, he saw its potential immediately. Holding it in his hands, he felt a surge of excitement. It was the missing link in his design, the key to turning wind into electricity. Jeffrey and Gilbert watched as he carefully examined it, their expressions a mix of confusion and awe. "What are you going to do with that?" Jeffrey asked. "You'll see," William replied, his voice filled with quiet confidence. The search for materials wasn't without its challenges. Some villagers began to complain about William's scavenging, accusing him of making a mess or wasting his time. Others mocked him openly, calling him a fool for believing he could harness the wind. But William had grown used to their doubts. He knew that innovation often looked strange to those who didn't understand it. Instead of feeling discouraged, he used their skepticism as motivation, reminding himself that every great idea once seemed impossible. At home, Agnes watched her son's growing collection with quiet concern. She admired his determination but worried about the toll it was taking on him. "You're working too hard," she said one evening as William sketched designs by the light of their kerosene lamp. "You need to rest." But William shook his head, his eyes fixed on the paper in front of him. "I'm almost there," he said softly. Agnes didn't press further. She could see the fire in her son's eyes, a fire that reminded her of Trywell in his younger days. She decided to trust in his vision, even if she didn't fully understand it. The closer William came to assembling his windmill, the more determined he became to find the final pieces he needed. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. On one particularly lucky visit to the scrapyard, he found an old fan blade, dented but intact. As he picked it up, he felt a rush of excitement. "This is it," he murmured, running his fingers along its edges. Jeffrey and Gilbert cheered from behind him, their belief in his project growing stronger with every discovery. The windmill was no longer just an idea. It was becoming real. Back in the village, whispers of William's work began to shift. Where there had once been ridicule, there was now curiosity. People stopped by his workshop to watch as he sorted through his materials, piecing them together with care and precision. Children crowded around, pointing at the contraption taking shape in his yard. "Is it really going to work?" one asked. William looked up, a confident smile on his face. "It will," he said simply. Though doubt still lingered in some corners, the growing sense of possibility was undeniable. Even Trywell, who had been skeptical of William's efforts, began to take notice. One evening, he approached his son as William worked late into the night. "You've been working hard," Trywell said, his tone softer than usual. William paused, surprised by his father's words. "I just want to help," he replied, his voice steady but earnest. Trywell nodded, his expression unreadable. Though he didn't fully understand what his son was building, he couldn't deny the dedication William had shown. For the first time, a flicker of pride stirred in his heart. As the final pieces of the windmill came together, William felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The pile of scrap metal that had once drawn laughter was now a towering structure, its blades poised to catch the wind. Standing before it, he felt the enormity of what he was attempting. This was more than a machine. It was a symbol of hope, of resilience, of what could be achieved through determination. And though the journey was far from over, William knew he was closer than ever to proving that even in the face of doubt, change was possible. The day William decided to test his windmill, a nervous excitement filled the air. His family gathered around, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The towering structure, made from salvaged parts and bound together with William's determination, stood tall against the sky. Its blades, crafted from a broken fan and pieces of metal, shimmered in the sunlight. William's heart raced as he prepared for the moment of truth. This was it, the culmination of weeks of labor, countless setbacks, and unwavering hope. The entire village seemed to buzz with anticipation. Neighbors peeked from their doorways, whispering to one another about the boy and his strange machine. Some were still doubtful, shaking their heads at the sight of the contraption. "It'll never work," one man muttered. But others, curious despite themselves, joined the crowd gathering near William's home. Children pushed to the front, their wide eyes fixed on the windmill. For William, the attention was both thrilling and terrifying. He knew the stakes were high, not just for his reputation, but for his family's future. William stepped forward, holding a small bulb connected to wires that led to the dynamo. The plan was simple. If the blades spun fast enough, they would generate enough electricity to light the bulb. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the wires, ensuring everything was in place. Gilbert and Jeffrey stood beside him, offering silent encouragement. "Are you ready?" Jeffrey asked, his voice low but steady. William nodded, his gaze locked on the windmill. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew he had to try. As the wind began to pick up, the blades of the windmill started to turn, slowly at first, then faster, catching the breeze with each rotation. The crowd murmured in awe as the structure came to life, its movement graceful yet powerful. William held his breath, watching the dynamo closely. The bulb flickered faintly, a small spark of light that sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. But just as quickly as it appeared, the light dimmed and went out. A hush fell over the onlookers. The first attempt had failed. The failure hit William like a punch to the chest. For a moment, he stood frozen, staring at the windmill as the blades continued to turn in the wind. The crowd around him began to disperse, their curiosity quickly fading into murmurs of disappointment. "I told you it wouldn't work," someone whispered, loud enough for him to hear. Jeffrey placed a hand on William's shoulder, his voice soft but firm. "Don't give up. It's not over yet." But the weight of the moment pressed down on William, and he struggled to hold back his frustration. At home, the mood was tense. Trywell, though sympathetic, questioned whether William's efforts were worth the strain. "You've done enough, son," he said, his tone gentle but final. "Maybe it's time to let it go." Agnes, however, remained quietly supportive, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and pride. She didn't say much, but her presence alone reminded William that she believed in him. Despite their words, William couldn't shake the sense of failure. He felt as though he had let everyone down, especially his family. That night, as the village settled into silence, William sat alone in his yard, staring up at the stars. The windmill loomed behind him, its blades now still against the dark sky. He replayed the failure in his mind, searching for what had gone wrong. Was it the dynamo? The wiring? The blades? The questions swirled around him like the wind, relentless and unyielding. But beneath the frustration, a spark of determination still burned. Failure, he realized, was part of the process. If he stopped now, he would never know what was truly possible. The next morning, William returned to the windmill with fresh resolve. Jeffrey and Gilbert joined him, ready to help however they could. Together, they inspected every part of the machine, searching for flaws and making adjustments. "Maybe the blades need to be bigger," Jeffrey suggested, pointing at the fan. William nodded, his mind already racing with ideas. Though the first attempt had failed, it had also given him something invaluable: knowledge. He now understood the gaps in his design, and he was determined to fix them. Word of William's determination spread quickly through the village. Those who had doubted him began to take notice of his persistence. While some still scoffed at the idea of a windmill, others grew curious about what he might accomplish. Children gathered near his yard, watching as he climbed up the structure to adjust the blades. Their wide-eyed fascination gave him a renewed sense of purpose. "If they can believe in me," he thought, "then I can't afford to stop now." Failure, he realized, wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something greater. As William worked, he found himself drawing strength from unexpected places. Trywell, though still skeptical, began offering small gestures of support. One evening, he brought William a set of pliers, quietly placing them beside him without a word. Agnes continued to prepare meals from their limited supplies, her quiet encouragement a constant reminder of why William had started this journey in the first place. Even Jeffrey and Gilbert's unwavering enthusiasm kept him motivated. The windmill was no longer just his project. It had become a symbol of hope for those closest to him. Each adjustment brought new challenges, but also new discoveries. William experimented with different materials for the blades, testing their weight and durability against the wind. He rewired the dynamo, ensuring a stronger connection to the bulb. Every step forward felt like a small victory, a reminder that progress was possible, even in the face of adversity. Though the work was slow and exhausting, it filled William with a sense of purpose, unlike anything he had ever felt before. He was no longer just building a machine. He was building a future. Finally, after weeks of revisions and tests, William stood before the windmill once more, ready for another attempt. This time the air was thick with anticipation, not from the villagers, but from within himself. The failures of the past no longer haunted him. They had become his teachers, guiding him to this moment. As the wind picked up and the blades began to spin, William felt a surge of hope. He tightened his grip on the bulb, watching as the dynamo whirred to life. The moment of truth had arrived, and this time, he was ready. As the blades of the windmill spun faster, a faint hum emerged from the dynamo, signaling its activation. William gripped the bulb tightly, his heart pounding as he waited for the result. All eyes were on him. The few villagers who had gathered out of curiosity, his loyal friends Jeffrey and Gilbert, and his family standing just behind him. Then, in an instant, it happened. A soft, warm glow radiated from the bulb, cutting through the late afternoon shadows. Gasps rippled through the small crowd, and William felt a wave of triumph wash over him. The light wasn't just a flicker, it was a declaration. Against all odds, against the doubts and ridicule, the windmill had worked. William stood in stunned silence, his hands trembling as he stared at the glowing bulb. For a moment, it didn't feel real. Then, as cheers erupted around him, reality came crashing in. Jeffrey clapped him on the back, his laughter filled with joy. "You did it!" he shouted, his voice echoing across the yard. Even Trywell, usually reserved, couldn't hide the pride in his eyes as he nodded approvingly at his son. The crowd grew, villagers drawn by the noise and the sight of something extraordinary. Children pointed at the windmill, their faces lit with wonder. Some adults, who had once dismissed William's project, approached with hesitant curiosity. "He made the wind work for him," one man murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. For William, this moment wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving himself right. The light from the bulb was more than a small victory. It was hope, tangible and bright, in a place that had been overshadowed by despair. As night fell, the glow of the bulb became a beacon, drawing people from all corners of the village. The windmill, once mocked as an impossible dream, now stood as a symbol of resilience and innovation. William watched as neighbors gathered, their voices filled with excitement. For the first time in months, the atmosphere in WINDMILL felt alive. William's heart swelled with a mix of pride and gratitude. The windmill wasn't just his achievement. It belonged to everyone who had supported him along the way. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. As the news of William's success spread, the atmosphere in WINDMILL began to shift. The villagers, once bound by the weight of drought and despair, now had something new to talk about: hope. People who had dismissed William as a dreamer now approached him with admiration. "How did you do it?" they asked, their voices filled with curiosity and wonder. William, though humble, explained the basics of his windmill in simple terms, careful not to overwhelm them. "It's not magic," he would say with a smile. "It's just the power of the wind and a little hard work." Back at home, the glow of the bulb brought an almost surreal comfort to the Kamkwamba family. For the first time, they could gather around a light that wasn't fueled by expensive kerosene. Trywell, who had once doubted the project, now sat in quiet reflection, watching the bulb flicker softly in the corner of the room. "You've done something incredible, William," he finally admitted, his voice steady but filled with pride. Agnes smiled as she prepared dinner, her heart swelling with gratitude. The windmill had not only brought light, it had reignited their hope. Despite the growing admiration, William's work was far from over. The windmill was just the beginning, and he knew there was still much to improve. The light bulb was proof of concept, but his ultimate goal was to create something that could power a water pump. In the quiet hours of the night, as the village slept, William sat by his sketches, planning the next phase. He thought of the dry fields and the families struggling to survive. The windmill had given them light, but he was determined to give them life. Jeffrey and Gilbert remained by his side, their loyalty unwavering. "What's next?" Jeffrey asked one afternoon, his voice filled with excitement. William pointed to the empty fields stretching beyond the village. "Water," he said simply. His friends exchanged glances, their admiration for him growing stronger. Together, they began gathering ideas and materials for the next project. Though the challenges ahead were daunting, William felt ready. The success of the windmill had taught him that even the smallest victories could inspire monumental change. The windmill had become more than just a machine. It was a beacon of possibility for WINDMILL. Children ran past it during the day, pointing to its spinning blades with awe, while adults gathered in small groups to discuss its implications. "If William can do this," they said, "what else is possible?" Slowly, the skepticism that had once surrounded his efforts began to fade. In its place, a sense of pride grew. William's invention wasn't just a triumph for his family. It was a symbol of what the village could achieve through resilience and ingenuity. As the days passed, William began to see the impact of his work in ways he hadn't anticipated. Families, inspired by his determination, started to think differently about their own challenges. Some began to repair old tools, while others experimented with small improvements to their homes and farms. The drought still loomed, but there was a noticeable shift in the way people approached their struggles. William realized that his windmill had sparked more than curiosity. It had ignited a belief in the power of innovation to change their lives. At home, the windmill had become a fixture of daily life. The soft glow of the bulb brought warmth to their nights, making the once dark evenings feel less daunting. William's sisters often sat near the light, reading and playing, their laughter filling the house. Trywell, though still reserved, often stood outside, watching the windmill spin as if contemplating its deeper meaning. For Agnes, the light represented a new chapter for their family, one where hope and possibility replaced despair. William saw all of this, and it filled him with quiet pride. But deep down, William knew his work was far from over. The windmill was only the first step in a much larger journey. There were still problems to solve, like bringing water to the fields and scaling his invention to benefit more people in the village. Each night, as the wind whispered through the blades, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The light he had created was only a glimpse of what was possible. He didn't just want to change his family's future. He wanted to transform the future of WINDMILL. With the success of the windmill, William's vision began to expand beyond his family's needs. He started imagining how his invention could benefit the entire village. The idea of using wind power to pump water and irrigate crops seemed both ambitious and necessary. The fields around WINDMILL remained dry and lifeless, their cracked soil a constant reminder of the drought's toll. William believed that if he could bring water to these fields, the villagers could reclaim their livelihoods and face the future with renewed hope. Geoffrey and Gilbert rallied behind him, their belief in his mission unshaken. Together, they began scavenging for materials once more, this time with an even bigger goal in mind. William's plan involved building a second windmill equipped to draw water from the earth. The project was daunting, but William approached it with the same determination that had driven him to build the first windmill. He spent countless hours studying and refining his designs, his mind filled with images of green fields and flowing water. The villagers, inspired by William's persistence, began to see his dream as their own. Some offered to help, bringing scraps of metal and old tools to contribute to the project. Others shared stories of how the windmill had given them hope, their voices filled with gratitude. For the first time in months, the people of WINDMILL felt united by a shared purpose. The windmill had shown them that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. Now they wanted to be part of that change. At home, the Kamkwamba family watched as their son's efforts transformed not just their household, but the entire community. Trywell, once skeptical, began to take pride in William's achievements, offering advice and assistance wherever he could. Agnes, always supportive, prepared meals for the volunteers who came to help. Even William's sisters joined in, carrying small tools and helping to organize materials. The windmill project had become a family effort, a symbol of what they could achieve when they worked together. The construction of the second windmill brought a new energy to WINDMILL. Every day, villagers gathered near William's yard to watch the progress unfold. Some offered their strength, helping to lift heavy parts into place, while others brought small tokens of encouragement, cups of water, freshly cooked meals, or simply kind words. For William, this collaboration was both humbling and invigorating. The project had grown beyond his hands. It had become a collective effort, driven by the shared dream of a better future for everyone. As the structure began to take shape, so did the community's sense of hope. Conversations shifted from despair to possibility. Farmers who had once resigned themselves to the loss of their crops began to talk about what they would plant once the fields had water again. Mothers who had spent their days rationing food started to imagine fuller plates and healthier children. William's windmill wasn't just changing the landscape. It was transforming the spirit of the village one step at a time. The process, however, was not without its challenges. On more than one occasion, pieces of the windmill broke during construction, forcing William and his team to start over. The setbacks were frustrating, but they also taught valuable lessons. Each failure brought with it new insights, pushing William to think creatively and adapt. Jeffrey and Gilbert, ever loyal, kept spirits high with their humor and optimism. If the windmill could laugh, it'd be laughing at us right now, Jeffrey joked after one particularly difficult day. The laughter that followed was a reminder of the resilience that had brought them this far. Despite the obstacles, the community's determination never wavered. William's belief in the project was contagious, spreading to every corner of Wimbe. Even the skeptics who had once doubted him began to offer their help, their curiosity turning into admiration. The second windmill was more than just a machine. It was a testament to what could be achieved when a community came together with a shared purpose. And as its blades neared completion, the villagers couldn't help but feel that they were on the brink of something extraordinary. The day the second windmill came to life was one the villagers of Wimbe would never forget. As the blades began to spin, driven by the steady breeze, a crowd gathered around William's creation, their excitement palpable. Unlike the first windmill, this one was connected to a makeshift pump. Its purpose clear: to draw water from the ground and deliver it to the dry, thirsty fields. The moment the pump sputtered and roared to life, sending a steady stream of water into an irrigation channel, the crowd erupted in cheers. For William, it was a moment of overwhelming pride and relief. He knelt beside the pump, running his hands through the cool water as it flowed freely for the first time in years. The barren fields, once lifeless, were now alive with possibility. Farmers hurried to guide the water toward their crops, their faces lit with hope. "This is what we've been waiting for," one man said, his voice trembling with emotion. William smiled, knowing that his work had finally begun to make a tangible difference. The impact of the second windmill spread quickly. Within weeks, patches of green began to dot the landscape, a stark contrast to the dry and cracked soil that had defined the village for so long. Crops began to grow, and the faint hum of the pump became a symbol of life renewed. Villagers who had once relied on bartering for food now looked forward to harvesting their own produce. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was deeply emotional, restoring a sense of pride and agency to the people of Wimbe. As the fields flourished, so did the relationships within the community. People worked side by side, sharing tools, seeds, and stories of resilience. The windmills stood as a testament to what they could achieve when they believed in one another and in the power of innovation. For William, it was the fulfillment of a dream he had carried since the darkest days of the drought. But even as he looked out over the transformed village, he couldn't help but think of what more could be done. The windmills were just the beginning. Word of William's windmills began to spread beyond Wimbe, carried by visitors and travelers who shared his story. What had started as a local triumph soon caught the attention of people from neighboring villages and towns. They came to see the machines for themselves, marveling at how a young boy with no formal training had harnessed the power of the wind to transform his community. To them, William wasn't just an inventor. He was a symbol of resilience and ingenuity, proof that even in the face of impossible odds, change was possible. Among the visitors were reporters and aid workers, eager to document the story of the boy who had brought light and water to his village. Cameras clicked as William stood beside his windmills, his quiet demeanor masking the pride he felt. He spoke humbly about his journey, emphasizing the support of his friends, family, and community. "I didn't do this alone," he said repeatedly, his words resonating with those who listened. The photographs and articles that followed introduced William's story to the world, sparking a wave of admiration and curiosity. Soon, invitations began to arrive, offering William opportunities to share his story on a larger stage. Schools, organizations, and conferences wanted to hear from the boy who had defied the odds. At first, the idea of speaking to strangers felt daunting. William had spent his life in the quiet rhythms of Wimbe, and the thought of stepping onto a global platform was both thrilling and intimidating. But as he considered these invitations, he realized the potential they held. His story could inspire others to see challenges not as barriers, but as opportunities for innovation. With the support of his family, William accepted his first invitation to speak at a regional event. The experience was surreal. As he stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause, their faces filled with admiration. William spoke simply and honestly, recounting the struggles of his village and the spark of an idea that had driven him to act. "Where you come from doesn't define what you can achieve," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The crowd rose to their feet, their applause echoing in William's heart. He realized then that his story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who believed in the power of dreams. As William's story spread, the impact extended far beyond what he had ever imagined. Messages poured in from people across the globe, students, teachers, inventors, and even leaders, expressing their admiration and gratitude. Many said his journey had inspired them to pursue their own ideas, to look at obstacles as opportunities. Some young boys and girls from villages much like Wimbe wrote to William, sharing their dreams of building machines or solving problems in their communities. Each message reaffirmed what William had always believed. Change begins with a single idea. With his growing recognition came new opportunities to learn. Organizations and schools offered scholarships, eager to help him continue his education. For William, this was a dream he had once thought impossible. After years of being forced to leave school due to financial struggles, he now had the chance to dive deeper into the world of science and engineering. Yet, even as he prepared to leave WINDMILL to study, his heart remained rooted in his village. He saw education not just as a personal achievement, but as a tool to bring even greater change to his community. Before leaving, William gathered the villagers to express his gratitude. Standing beneath the shadow of his windmill, he spoke about the collective effort that had brought his vision to life. "This windmill is ours," he said, gesturing toward the towering blades. "It belongs to everyone who believed in the power of what we could do together." His words stirred a sense of pride among the crowd. For them, William wasn't just a boy with a big idea. He was a leader, a reminder of what was possible when they worked as one. Saying goodbye to his family and friends was bittersweet. Trywell, who had grown to admire his son's resilience, pulled him into a rare embrace. "Make us proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Agnes, her eyes brimming with tears, handed William a small bundle of food for his journey. Geoffrey and Gilbert stood nearby, trying to mask their sadness with jokes. "Don't forget us when you're famous," Gilbert quipped, his grin faltering slightly. William smiled, knowing that no matter how far he went, WINDMILL would always be his home. As William embarked on his new journey, he carried with him the lessons of WINDMILL: resilience, creativity, and the power of community. His story continued to gain momentum, reaching international audiences through documentaries, interviews, and books. At every event he attended, he remained grounded, always speaking about the people who had shaped his journey. "My village taught me everything I know," he would say, his words a testament to the strength of those who had supported him. For William, the windmill was never just about himself. It was about showing others what could be achieved with determination and unity. In his travels, William encountered young people from all walks of life, many of whom saw him as a role model. He encouraged them to believe in their potential, sharing the same message that had fueled his own dreams. "No matter how small your resources, your ideas have the power to make a difference," he told them. These interactions reminded him of his own beginnings, an idea sparked by a library book and a desire to help his family. Now he was watching that spark ignite in others, spreading hope across the world. Back in WINDMILL, the legacy of William's windmills continued to grow. The fields flourished under their newfound irrigation, and the villagers embraced innovation in their daily lives. The windmill had not only transformed their physical environment, but also their mindset. People began to dream bigger, to believe that they could overcome their struggles through creativity and hard work. Even in his absence, William's influence was felt in every corner of the village, from the children playing under the shadow of the windmill to the farmers harvesting their crops. For William, the journey was far from over. As he stood on stages around the world, sharing his story with thousands, he thought of the dry fields of WINDMILL, the faces of his family, and the hum of the windmill as it brought light to the darkness. His mission had grown, but his heart remained the same: to inspire, to innovate, and to create a better future for those who needed it most. The boy who had built a windmill from scraps had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the smallest ideas could change the world. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of resilience, innovation, and hope. William's story reminds us all that no matter where we come from, we have the power to create change. One idea, one step at a time. Now, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? Share your city and country in the comments below. Your stories and connections inspire us to keep sharing these powerful lessons with the world. And before you go, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on more inspiring stories like this one. Together, let's celebrate the extraordinary potential within each of us to make a difference. See you in the next video.